Good afternoon, I'm Giovanni Dennis with the Midday News. Special welcome if you're watching online at onespotmedia.com. The 5-year-old boy who was mauled by dogs in the St. Deca community in St. Anne is to be transferred to a facility in Kingston today to undergo cosmetic surgery. He was attacked by the dogs while returning from a shop Sunday afternoon. Acting Senior Medical Officer at the St. Anne's Bay Regional Hospital, Dr. Tanya Hamilton Johnson, told our news center that the boy was bitten all over his body.
At the time of presentation, the child was in what we would consider a very unstable state. And so therefore the team had to resuscitate the patient to him, and then subsequently for full assessment we took him to theatre where we did surgery to ensure that the wounds were clean and to actually stop bleeding and to further stabilize it. However, he will subsequently need further management by the plastic surgeon, and so the plan is to transfer him as soon as he's stabilized.
Dr. Hamilton Johnson says the boy has regained consciousness.
He's talking, and I believe he will do well. I believe he will do well. I'm optimistic about his progress, but it will take a long while, and I think all the support he needs, in addition to emotional and psychological support, will be needed. And so for the family, I think the community needs to support the family, mother and grandmother. They are traumatized.
Meanwhile, Managing Director of the Jamaica Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Pamela Lawson, is expressing unease about one of the major challenges to the Dogs Liability for Injuries Act. Mrs. Lawson says there is one common factor among most of the attacks.
We've had great conversation on this matter, of course, because even those of us who are responsible dog owners have issues with the Dog Liability Act, but we know you have to be tough. We accept that you have to be tough. But every incident of attack, I mean every incident, there is no fence line. These animals are not being contained within the confines of their owner's property. And that is the problem. The animals are allowed to stray onto the road. It does address it, but we really do have laws that address it, and that's under the Keeping of Animals Act. And it's the same thing, always the same thing. These animals are coming out of the confines of their property. I can only offhand think of maybe one case where I know there was a fence line, but it was compromised.
Mrs. Lawson is hoping that this is taken into consideration when the House of Representatives wraps up the debate on the bill today. The National Water Commission, NWC, has responded to the tragic death of the 6-year-old boy O'Shane Banton from Clarendon. O'Shane's body was found on the compound of a sewage plant in Laneltown on Saturday. The police are awaiting a post-mortem as investigators are unable to identify the possible cause of death. NWC's Corporate Communications Manager Andrew Cannon spoke to our news centre on the matter.
The National Water Commission is aware of the extremely unfortunate and tragic incident involving the death of O'Shane Banton. We are doing our own internal investigation. Additionally, we look forward to cooperating fully with the authorities in their investigations.
More concern this afternoon from environmentalists on the government's decision to allow quarrying in the Dry Harbour Mountains. The latest comes from an environmental economist. Prince Moore has the details.
Environmental economist Dr. Peter Edwards believes the government might not have fully accounted for the cost of mining in the Dry Harbour Mountains in St. Anne when it gave its approval. There has been opposition to mining and quarrying in the area since it was revealed that the government granted a permit to Bengal Development Limited. Dr. Edwards says the government has pointed to the potential economic benefits, but he argues there are negative consequences as well.
This is a private property, but it's going to actually have some additional environmental costs associated with operations, things like fugitive dust, things like damage to the water table, things like damage potentially to the reef across the road that may impact fisheries and also may impact small-scale and localized tourism. So the challenge with these projects is often on the benefit side where we're asked to, calculate price per lizard, which is actually not a feasible thing to do. But on the cost side, we don't typically get a full knowledge of the full suite of environmental costs.
Dr. Edwards says there is no evidence Jamaicans will benefit from the project to the extent suggested by the government.
The Prime Minister and others are socializing this as a benefit, not only to the private individual, which they have all the right to do, but to Jamaica in large. And I'm not sure if the benefits to Jamaica are actually as much as being touted in this particular case.
On Monday, Chairman of the Jamaica Environment Trust, JET, Diana Macaulay, said the government's decision is a breach of a planning framework, a point also agreed on by Dr. Edwards.
If you have an environmental agency with all the people who get paid and good technocrats doing this work, and then a minister can come in and overturn it, if you do that, then you have to really show the Jamaican society where this is benefiting the society beyond the private gains to the developer and the 50 to 100 people and the supposed tax revenues that are going to be put into the Jamaican coffers. Or if the developer is able to say by the aggregate we're going to build road networks and these are going to increase jobs.
Ms. Macaulay and environmental advocate Wendy Lee has called on the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to allow quarrying and mining in the Dry Harbour Mountain. Prince Moore, TVJ News.
Jamaica's COVID-19 case count now stands at 9,959. 30 new cases were recorded yesterday. Their ages range from 7 to 89 years. Meanwhile, Jamaica recorded no new COVID-19 deaths for a second straight day. The country's death toll remains at 231. The Ministry of Health says two deaths are being investigated. The number of persons hospitalized with the respiratory illness has decreased to 81. 6 are critically ill. The St. Ann Health Department is reporting that there is a lack of cooperation with residents who are identified for COVID-19 testing. At a recent St. Ann Municipal Corporation meeting, Medical Health Officer from the department, Dr. Tamika Henry, said residents have threatened to stone the authorities if they show up at their homes. Dr. Henry is appealing to residents to cooperate with the health teams.
We have a positive case whose relatives don't want to come out and get tested, and they have told our public health nurses that if they come to their homes, they're going to stone them. All right? So it's really very important that all of us join together in this fight. The health department cannot do it alone, and you cannot do it alone. All of us have to collaborate.
She's also encouraging persons to be socially responsible.
Supposed to be in quarantine, we indicate to them that they're supposed to be in quarantine. And if we realize that they're breaking the quarantine, then the onus is upon us to call the police. That is our social responsibility. All right? Remember, the health department and the JCF cannot act if we're not aware of something. So once you are aware, the responsibility lies at your feet to do something about it.
And it's now time for a break on the Midday News. Please stay with us. We'll have more stories when we return. Welcome back, and we're continuing the news. The case between the bauxite company Windalco and the residents of Kent Village in St. Catherine has been put off until next year. Last year, residents filed a lawsuit against Windalco over the pollution of the Rio Cobra, which led to a massive fish kill. The case was set to commence today in the St. Catherine Parish Court in Spanish Town. The residents will have to wait until April 16 next year to know if they will be granted justice, as the case was put off this morning. Last October, NEPA issued a warning to residents to stop using the Rio Cobra after the National Environment and Planning Agency NEPA linked pollution to effluent flowing from its storage ponds. The contamination had led to persons becoming ill, and communities like Kent Village near the Bogwalk Gorge in the parish. A representative from the St. Catherine Public Health Department later served notice on Windalco to stop the release of caustic soda into the Rio Cobra. The National Works Agency (NWA) says the Janga Gully Bridge in Portland was ordered closed with immediate effect yesterday. This as a result of the damage caused to a section of the bridge. According to the NWA, the closure is as a result of a hole in the structure.
Weekend, we got a report that something was amiss with the deck of that particular structure. Our parish team went and they had a look, and based on investigations, it was determined that the bridge had to be closed because a hole had developed in the deck.
NWA Communication Manager Stephen Shaw says efforts will be made to address the matter as soon as possible. He's urging motorists not to use the bridge.
Actually erected a closed sign on one of the approaches, and so we are saying to persons this structure should not be used at this time.
Mr. Shaw added that a team from the NWA will assess the damage, which will determine how the agency will respond.
Our senior engineers, our team from the engineering department, is scheduled to visit the area and to make an assessment as to how we can move forward as it relates to having a fix on this particular problem.
In sports, the Reggae Boys are now trailing 1-0 with host Saudi Arabia in first half action in the second of their two-match international friendly series in Riyadh. The Jamaicans are seeking to rebound from last Saturday's 3-0 defeat in the first game. The match also marks coach Theodore Tapper Whitmore's 100th game in charge of the Reggae Boys. Whitmore is in his third stint as national coach. So the Saudi Arabia 1-all. And that's to remind you that it's Saudi Arabia 1-0 at halftime. Well, that should be 1-all at halftime. Meanwhile, TVJ Sports understands that two members of the Reggae Boys squad in Saudi Arabia have tested positive for COVID-19. This brings to 7 the number of persons in the Jamaican delegation with positive COVID-19 results since their departure for Saudi Arabia on November 7. On Sunday, JFF General Secretary Dalton Wint confirmed his positive test. However, it's understood a second test since then has revealed a negative status. Assistant coach Jerome Waite, who previously tested positive, has also had a negative result since then. And that's the Midday News. I'm Giovanni Dennis. Join us at 7 for Primetime News. On behalf of the sports, production and news teams, good afternoon.